Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Newt Tube for another session of our wine stories with Kelby James Russell 2014 Dry Riesling. So tonight we have our usual suspects, Heather, our front of house manager, and Rebecca, our brand ambassador, Kelby winemaker, and Meg's assistant winemaker. And tonight we have special guest John Hughes from Riesling Freak in Australia, and he's joining us to talk about Riesling. This should be a lot of fun. So without further ado, cheers everyone. Riesling in the afternoon, or in John's case, Riesling in the morning.
Yeah.
Cold coffee.
Yeah.
Breakfast.
So this is, we're tasting the Kelby James Russell Riesling tonight. And this is something, well, it's becoming not so new, but new as of 2013, the year after Kelby joined Red Newt. This is a little bit of a spin-off label, a personal project of Kelby's here within the Red Newt umbrella. So I'm going to let Kelby kind of talk more about that and kind of lead things as they go here.
Yeah. The KJR Riesling has always been made in kind of an homage to the Australian style of Riesling. That was the idea. I had a lot of great experiences in Australia, in Tasmania for the 2011 vintage, which was, well, the weather didn't really cooperate that year in Tasmania, but it was still a good experience. And then in 2012 in the Barossa at Yalumba, and fell in love with the expression of dry Riesling that Australia really specializes in. It's unlike anything that we see in the US or really anywhere else. And it's just a beautiful expression of the soil and the climate there in a really pure form that's really expressive of the terroir. So I wanted to tinker around with that in the Finger Lakes. I didn't want to just copy what they do because we're radically different in many ways. But I did want to create something that kind of was an homage to that style, spoke to that style, spoke to the leanness of it, but the real bright citrus, also something that rewarded in the aging that I think of for Australian Riesling. They're just incredibly long-lived and just developed these beautiful secondary characteristics. And yeah, we decided to give it a go. 2013 was the first vintage of any of the KJR wines, but the Riesling as well. And that came from our Tango Oaks site for any of the Red Newt people out there. The 14, if you've had the 14, a little different. With the 14 vintage going forward, we switched to Lahoma. So a little bit richer and riper of a site than the Tango. Tango's a little more mineral and gravel. They both worked really well, but this seemed to suit the style a little bit better, or I suppose maybe I should say Tango would be more like, I don't know, maybe Polish Hill to speak Aussie terms, and the Lahoma version is more like Eden Valley, just a little bit rounder. So yeah, I don't want to dive too much into the winemaking just yet because I've done a lot of talking in a row here, but I think the wine's showing beautiful. John does not have the wine, unfortunately. But for those of us who are tasting it, I think it's still really youthful. It's a 14, but it's still super bright in the glass right now.
Yeah, I love the way these the 13 and the 14 are well, actually a fair amount different, but I love the sort of really precise angularity of the acid and phenolics in this wine, and overlaid with this real beautiful kind of a cushy roundness, but not at all broad, just really tight and focused and smooth. Yeah.
I remember when Kelby brought up the first sample of the 13, and it was in, one of the dirty old plastic beakers, and it was, here, taste this. Do you think people would buy it? And I can remember thinking, yes, but it needs to sit for at least a couple of years. And we did. We let it sit for a couple of years before we released it. I don't remember exactly what year we released it. But because they're so lean and they're so taut, and it's such a different approach to Riesling production compared to what we're accustomed to seeing in the United States, it is such an easy conversation starter in the tasting room and at tables when people are looking, I want Riesling, but I need it to be really edgy and sort of, lean and mean today. Then I've got that wine for you, and it's the KJR Riesling. And to watch it grow from vintage to vintage has been wonderful. This is drinking beautifully, and yet it's still a baby. It's young. I could sit on this for another 5-10 years and not even care about it. I would just forget about it and then be happy one day when I went in the cellar and found it.
So this is the current release, right?
Correct.
When was this one released?
We released this in
The fall?
the fall. I want to say late August or early September.
And we still have some of this left.
Yes, we do.
So maybe Kelby, you or John could speak to this. What is it about this style of Riesling that does speak to a little bit of bottle conditioning, bottle age, that really lets it come into its own and shine a little bit more?
Yeah, I think with this dry Riesling, to be in Australia, we're probably about 98% dry Riesling from all our production. And I think the way it's made, the pH, the acid level, the expression of fruit, just allows them to cellar in the bottle over time. And like I've got dry Riesling in my cellar going back 30 years, and they're still drinking nicely today. So, Kelby?
Yeah, I think there's I think when I talk to customers in the US, because this is very much a niche wine, I would say in the US right now, or this expression of it. My entry point is almost to describe it to them as still champagne. That seems, people just can't really conceptualize how dry a truly dry Riesling can be and should be in some ways. And much like champagne benefits from time on lees, I think these styles of dry Riesling, they're so taut and they're so tightly wound because they're really beautifully made, if they're the right style, that they need the time in bottle to really kind of open up a little bit and express themselves. They're not doing that because of lees contact, but in the bottle, obviously, but they're doing that just naturally through the development in the bottle. And it's true. I think Australian Riesling, I mean, it's almost, I feel like it's not that you want to hear this for your sales purposes, John, but I feel like opening them before even 5 years out of vintage sometimes is, I mean, they drink beautifully, but there's so much left to go with them.
And there's so many wineries in Australia that do release wines after 5 years. Like we do a 5-year release, and quite a few local wineries around here do a 5-year release. For these wines, we normally end up picking them early. So around that 10 Beaume, 18 Brit Smart, 18 to 23 Brits. And then made in that angular style, which basically when they go into bottle that year, they're not drinkable. They do need that 4, 5, 6 years in bottle to really come into themselves. And then once they've come into themselves, they've still got the fruit there, but I really love that secondary character, which I often describe as biscuit, coffee biscuit, toasty, buttery, creamy, and just so enjoyable. And the wine then too is a real food-friendly wine. And the versatility of that wine with food and wine matching can go down that traditional white meat path, but can also handle a softer red meat, a creamy pasta, a pork dish. It's just turns into a bigger wine, I think, for a Riesling.
Mm-hmm. I think we'll get, this might be one of the most technical videos we'll put out there. Usually we're a little bit softer around the edges with our technical speak, but I think this style and how we've worked with it at Red Newt really lends itself to taking that dive for anyone who wants to be nerdy with us and watch more of this video. So for this wine and for any of the KJR Rieslings, it's a 2-stage ferment for us. which isn't necessarily what everyone does in Australia, but it's certainly common, especially because we're starting with QA23, which is just a great yeast for Riesling in this style. And then we chase it about a third of the way through with Vin 13 is the yeast we use here. And the two of them really work beautifully hand in hand. The QA really boosts the thiols, these sort of like grapefruit and sulfury sort of things that are really alluring as a young wine, but relatively transitory. And then for us, Vin 13 kind of helped to fix it. And both of them are, we would call them mean yeasts because they are just so aggressive in the fermenter. I've often joked that that out of spite, they sometimes just generate more sugar to keep fermenting because they don't stop yet. So you end up with this bone dry wine, as John said, quite angular, but really beautifully packed and tightly wound up, which really speaks to how it'll age over time. Is a note that will probably entertain John in particular. So a big difference between anywhere in Australia, but certainly the Riesling regions and the Finger Lakes is that it's a lot warmer, it's a lot sunnier. Obviously down in the Barossa or the Clare and the Eden than it is here. I think there was a study some number of years ago that showed the skins are 5 times thicker in Australia for Riesling than they are in the Rheingau. And we have a lot more in common with the Rheingau in terms of grape development and sun exposure on our vines. So Australian Riesling that I saw made was very carefully handled, very focused on free run. So these very gentle pressings or press cycles, the most delicate of the juice, trying to minimize skin contact, really protecting it. For better or worse, in 2013, my cheeky idea was that the Finger Lakes equivalent to Australian free run would be the pressings from one of our lots of Riesling. And that would probably have the same phenolic load as Australian free run. And so that's what we made it with. And that's, to this day, it's actually the only thing we press fraction for any reason anymore. Everything else we combine the free run and the pressings in the same tank now. But for this wine in particular, kind of in an odd way, for it to have the stuffing it needs to stand up to this style, we have to really lean into the harder pressings in particular, which is just so, it's almost like, if we're going to call Australia upside down, an Australian Riesling winemaker would think that winemaking is just absolutely upside down.
Yeah, and we've talked about that quite a bit, haven't we, Kelby? Like, just in Australia, as Kelby said, because of the sun and because of the heat, our winemaking is quite different to what you guys do in the Finger Lakes. But to get I say similar wine, but obviously a different wine, we need to have that press fraction in our winemaking. Otherwise, we end up with this really big, fat, phenolic wine at the end of it. So, but I must say, Kelby, like, I think with the Finger Lakes Rieslings over the past 10 years, would you agree even the sweeter wines have become drier over the past 10 years? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've kind of seen, and this might even be, this would resonate with you, is that we've seen kind of the sweeter ones get drier from a broader commercial standpoint, but we've also seen the re-embracing of kind of true Cabernet and Spätlese styles, and more of like a reserve or a single vineyard expression, which is not something that was commonly done 10 or 15 years ago, but that's now a category, and it's a smaller category for sure, but people who are really into dry Riesling are now becoming more open to the beautiful sweeter styles.
Yeah, and from a sort of a tasting room standpoint, Riesling's no longer sweet just for the sake of making and producing a sweeter wine. You have this, most of the Rieslings have become drier. The style is more distinct. But we now have, if it is a sweeter Riesling that's made with specific intentions and with a lot greater attention to detail and balance. And I think that's a huge difference when we're talking about the sweeter Rieslings now.
And we have the International Riesling Challenge over here in Canberra in Australia. And I've been going now for the last 20 years. I've definitely seen that trend of Finger Lakes Riesling really tightening up and smartening up and producing more of a balanced Riesling, which I think is absolutely awesome for the wine and for the region.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think of you as, in some ways, avant-garde in the opposite manner with your portfolio, because you have, you're one of the rare people that is doing non-just dry Riesling. Like you have some beautiful bottlings of an off-dry expression and the like.
Yeah, no, I suppose I love sweet Rieslings. I love German Rieslings, and I'm a big believer of making what you love to drink. And you're right, Kelby, like in Australia, as we said before, it's about 98% dry Riesling. And to find buyers for the sweeter style is difficult. But those who do appreciate and acknowledge what Riesling can do really appreciate that off dry and the Cabernet Spatz style.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very hard to make those in Australia too. Like I had to pick the site very carefully. Going back to what we were saying about the sun and the thicker skins, I was able to source a vineyard in Polish Hill River, which had access to really good water, a very big dam and water access. Well, we found this vineyard that could produce vines with very vigorous, big vines, big bunches, big berries. And I think those big berries are the success to our Cabernet style, because you are just looking at the virgin juice. We only pressed for about 450 litres per tonne, and which produces us a delicate wine. And I think wines with sugar need to show that delicate side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it, Max.
Yeah, I just want to touch a little bit on like the differences in vineyard management that we're dealing with between the Finger Lakes and Australia in general, but more specifically where you guys are. We're looking at a lot of times like a lot of rainfall with a lot of humidity and high heat, and looking at different disease pressures and how we manage that. And I feel like where you guys are at, you're dealing with opposite issues with sun exposure and heat stress, and I was just wondering if you guys want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, water in Australia at the moment is very rare. Even winters are getting drier and drier. So irrigation is the key for us, and putting water on the vine it's more about maintaining the vine than what it is about bumping up the crop levels. Our pruning is obviously a lot of management around sun protection. And we've also now gone for sun guard on the grapes. So basically we spray the grapes with a clay product similar to bentonite we use in a winery. And that acts like a sunscreen for the berries, if you like. But it also protects the leaves. So it allows the vine to continue to photosynthesize, producing sugars and healthy berries. So we're still ending up, by using a sun guard, we're still ending up with the green juice in the press. And the vineyard's not using this, we end up with more of a yellow juice in the press. So there's a lot we have to do in the vineyard, summertime, to manage the grapes for harvest. But you are exactly right with disease pressure. Our disease pressure in Australia is probably less because we haven't got the rain or the humidity in the vineyard around harvest.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Yeah, it's funny. In terms of opposites, I mean, for our best sites, we're out there pulling leaves out of the fruiting zone to get as much sunlight in as we can, especially in late summer into fall. And having been to, I mean, we went out and saw some vineyards with you. Gosh, what was that last year? It seems like forever ago. But and I just remember being struck again that, I mean, I think Riesling berries in the Finger Lakes are even at relatively lean sites are probably twice the size of the berries that you see typically coming in. It's just a wild difference.
Yep, huge difference.
So what wine do you have over on your end, John?
Right. Well, where we do match up, guys, is the vintage, and that's where it starts and stops. So, yeah. So I've got the 2014 Riesling Freak number 3 Clare Valley Riesling. So this wine is our all our wines at Riesling Freak are numbered, and the number representing the style and the region. So with my Clare Valley Riesling, that's from my family vineyard in Clare, Northern Clare White Hut. It's a sub-region. What you got there, Kelby?
I have the 15 vintage of the number 3.
Oh, right, you should have said something, mate. I could have opened the same wine.
No, I was just behind you when I saw the message come through. I was like, crap. No.
Right, okay. So yeah, so the site is Northern Clare. It's on very heavy red clay soils and really produces a fruit-driven style of Riesling. 2014 was a very dry vintage. Leading up to vintage, it was dry. But then just before harvest, we got 60 mil of rain and a heap of disease. So it was more of a fact that we had to pull the grapes off than leaving them on. So we were lucky enough to get the grapes off, and they came in about 11 Beaumay. But now we're looking at a wine with no botrytis. It's very clean, very rich from the 5 years of cellaring, and still got a long time left in it.
And Kelby, how does yours compare to the 14 that he has in his glass?
I mean, aging beautifully. I mean, I would say compared to the KJR, whether the 14 we tried tonight or the 15 that we can kind of remember, or Meg and I can at least remember tasting at some points. You see, I think a difference is that I wish we could express is that the Finger Lakes versions tend to be more negative. I think one thing I love about John's wines and this 15 that I'm trying is that there's just such a beautiful almost like background level of biscuitiness to it that's starting to come in. That's just it's there. It's not overtaking the wine. It's just a beautiful secondary component to what else is happening in the bottle.
And I think one thing of note too about this particular style of Riesling that we make at Red Newt that I think really follows after the Australian example is that this was the first wine that we have ever done, maybe not the first, but second, okay, wine that we've ever done under screw cap. And I know that the Australian Rieslings have often been done that way, and this was one of the first that we ever did. And logistics behind why both of you use that type of closure versus cork. I mean, I have my opinions, but I'll be quiet right now. So go.
Well, in Australia, we've been using screw cap now since 1998. So what's that, about 22 years now, and 22 vintages of Riesling under screw cap. For me, screw cap, I love screw cap for white wines. I love cork for red wines. I get a lot of debate over that as well. But screw cap really keeps in the freshness of the wine, holds the fruit, obviously minimal oxidation, but it does still allow the wine to develop in the bottle. So I think when you open the wines, like we're drinking the 14, 15 now, you are seeing a true aged Riesling of what the vineyard can do in the bottle without any influence from the cork. Whereas if you got cork in wine in bottles, obviously there's a lot more oxygen going through into the wine. And in my opinion, I love that for red wines because it really softens them down, softens the edges nicely. But in white wines are more acceptable for oxidation. And I think you do see the cork influence a lot more, especially in Riesling, which you're missing out on the vineyard. You're more seeing the closure in the wine. And I just see that as a downfall.
Yeah, I would say the same. There's just a purity to screw cap closure with Riesling and with whites that you almost get spoiled on once you get used to it. You know, when you're used to screw cap closure, when you have an older wine that's been aged under cork, more often than not, you end up. I mean, it's, you know, it sounds ridiculous to say you can taste the cork, but like the cork, even if it's not a corked wine, like the influence of that piece of bark in the wine, you can taste. Like it's, and some people like that, but you know, I would agree. You know, there's we work so hard with Riesling to express the site and the purity of the grape that muddy that with anything else just seems, you know, especially the last thing you do to the wine before it goes out into the world seems remarkably counterproductive.
I mean, for me, especially too, you know, with these types of wines, they're meant to be, you know, aged for a little bit and really bottle conditioned and come into their own. So you would think like maybe a little bit of oxygen ingress would enhance that aging process. But at the same token, I want something that I know I can also rely on so that when I crack that seal, I know my wine is good. It's not going to be faulty because the cork has failed in, you know, 18 different ways. So I think there really is something to be said about this expression of Riesling and the type of closure that it comes with.
And like I've got Rieslings at home, as I said, going back 30 years, and many of those in cork. And it's quite funny, I feel I have to open those wines now at home because you never know if the first bottle is going to be okay or the second bottle or the third bottle. But under screw cap, you can go out to a mate's place, go out to a restaurant, open the wine and know the wine's going to be safe and really an expression of itself. And it is exciting as a winemaker if you open that wine under screw cap.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, you know, this is, we understand it, or Megs and I certainly understand it, but for some of our listeners, you're just coming off of harvest, which seems, you know, we're just coming into the spring here, so that's always a bit of a mind flip for people. But how was 2020 for you?
2020 was it was difficult but rewarding. This year through the vineyards, we had Mother Nature come at us with all angles. We had frost, we had fire, and we had drought. So it was one of the more challenging years in terms of getting berries on the vine. Saying that we had like 40-degree temperatures in summer, but the month before vintage, we had temperatures sub 30 degrees Celsius, which did really good things for the ripening. So we ended up with natural acids in the Rieslings, which was obviously superb. At quantity, we were way down. We were 70% down in the Eden Valley vineyards and about 55% down in Clare. So not much of it, but what there is, I'm really proud of. So yeah, yep. But it's quite funny, guys. I can read all my vintage notes over the years, and it says hot, hot, dry, warm, and then you get to 2020 and you find out what hot, dry, and warm is all about. So yeah. How's your season looking?
Well, we had a scary almost start with March, which was not particularly warm, but the it wasn't cold enough either. So the vines were sap is starting to move. But then April cooled way off, and then we've had snow in the last week. So we really, we kind of had our spring in reverse. But as we're talking Wednesday evening here, and we had our last real frost threat, or well, it was a hard frost. So there's a lot of stuff that got hammered, but the vines seem like they'll be fine, and we're grateful to be through it. Spring frost.
Yeah, it was kind of touch and go, but sounds like that frost came. If it came in next week, it could have been a real issue. But I think we're in good shape.
Oh, good. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, spring was kind of in reverse because we kind of it felt like we had spring in January this year for a few weeks. So it was pretty bizarre weather this year so far.
Yep.
Well, John, I have to add, I know that at least at the moment you don't. I mean, you export quite a bit to the UK, which is closer to us than Australia, but still not the US. Is there a shipping option in the process or down that way to get wine to any of our particularly avid listeners that would like to try some of your amazing Riesling?
Yeah, we've got distributors in California, Quigley Fine Wines.
Oh, great.
So if they listeners look up Quigley Fine Wines, they can ship direct to customer. So, and the exciting thing is Quigley for our 2017 vintage, which just by fluke ends up being the best vintage I've ever experienced. And all those wines, multi-trophy winning wines. So if you get a hold of those, hopefully they should be reward.
Well, that's great. I'll put that information down there in the notes, as well as a link to your website so people can check out your winery a little bit more. That's great.
Okay, awesome. Yep. Yay.
So usually when we start to wrap things up, it's usually about dinner time. So we kind of think about what we might be hankering for dinner to go with the wine we just tasted. And since I already had my dinner and I drank most of my wine with dinner, except this last little glass, I'm going to tell you what I had. Usually I wait to go last. So yeah, tonight we had, it was sunny here and a beautiful afternoon. So I made my first time I've ever made tortillas or corn tortillas. Believe it or not, at age whatever I am. So I made some tortillas and we had a little sort of seared onions and peppers and salsa and some beet bean lentil burgers that I made last night, cut up, kind of a fajita idea with this Riesling. It was absolutely delicious. Perfect. How about you, Heather? What's happening in your house tonight?
So I actually have a beautiful recipe from Italy that came from one of my former students, and it is a lemon olive oil with just a hint of milk in it, slightly reduced. And I'm going to do that with some angel hair pasta and some veggies that I have, fresh veggies. So maybe some mushrooms, a little bit of shrimp, and then I also have some peppers and some tomatoes. And we're going to make it really colorful because I want something bright and colorful, and it's perfect for this wine.
How about you, Megs?
Let's see. Tonight I've got chicken thighs, by the way, marinating with basic olive oil, a little bit of a jalapeno infused honey, oregano, balsamic, and some other things that my significant other may have added to it. And I'm going to see if I still have some sunlight so that I can get out and actually grill this chicken. And have that with some, just like a simple green salad with some chev and blueberries and something light and fresh because today felt warm and spring-like.
Right. So now, John, you may be inclined to think of some sort of breakfast fare that will go with your wine.
Yes, yeah, toasted coffee went nicely with the Riesling this morning. So yeah, all good for sure. Yeah, but I'm all for Riesling the morning, afternoon, evening. People laugh at me, but does the job.
We agree.
Yep. When you have Riesling before coffee each day, you know it's going to be a good day. So, yeah.
You know, I see. I definitely understand. I embrace that idea. Sometimes I just don't seem to find the discipline, but I think there's hope. What do you have going on, Rebecca?
We are going to have spaghetti carbonara tonight. We have some pancetta from a local farmer here in Lima, and I think the creamy, cheesy pasta with this wine is going to be beautiful.
Mm. How about you, Kelby?
So tonight we have, there's a couple of us in Geneva that have been doing socially distanced takeout potlucks, where we all bring something to an outdoor area and then someone goes through and you collect your allotment of each dish and bring it back. And tonight, just by happenstance, the theme was Southeast Asian. So we have a whole bunch of, I'm not totally sure what's coming my way when dinner walks back across the street, but I know that it's all going to pair beautifully with these Rieslings. So I got lucky that I didn't have to think any more about it.
Great. Well, that sounds fantastic. So I think that's a wrap. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And John, thank you so much for making time in your morning before coffee to get on this call with us. Great having you.
Thanks for the invite, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good harvest.
All right. Cheers.
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 Cheers.